Okay, this is going to be a pretty simple tutorial on using Gimp, which is a free paint program for creating custom paints for iRacing. First, though, I want to apologize. I realize that I slur, even though I cannot hear it myself. I had cancer on the bottom of my mouth and the back and a tumor on my tongue about 10 years ago, and they had to cut out half of my tongue and do some reconstruction on my throat and reconstruct that half of my tongue and with some skin grafts and some things like that. And I'm cancer free now. I never chewed or smoked or anything like that. It was just one of those rare deals. And I realized, like I said, that I could be tough to understand, and I'm sorry for that. But I really wanted to do this tutorial to help out some of the new painters. And if you have a problem with that, tough shit, we're going to move forward. Um, Gimp is a great free program. It's one of the few or many that are used, I think, between Gimp and Photoshop and then Paint.net. That's probably 98% of what people use for doing paints. Photoshop CS is also just a wonderful program, but it's very expensive, and if you can't get your hands on it, Gimp is a great alternative. I've used Gimp for all of my paints, uh, less the last two that I did, and that's just because I just recently acquired Photoshop CS6. Most of my paints they're okay. I'm not the best painter, I know that, but they're not bad, and the reason they're not the greatest has nothing to do with Gimp in itself. It has to do with me not being the best painter. Um, you can do anything with Gimp, I believe, that you can do with Photoshop. It may take a few extra steps, and Photoshop makes certain aspects easier, but I just don't think for iRacing that there's any quality difference when it comes to doing a custom paint scheme. With that being said, we're going to go through the process that I use. And as we go through this, there'll be some stuff on here that maybe you'll adopt, but it just makes it easier for me to do certain things. The first thing I always do is create a separate folder just for that individual paint. And that's because that's because I do a lot of paints. But if you were to look at my paint folders, my iRacing paints, you'll see that I have a separate folder for every one of my paints. And within that folder, I have images that I send to the person that wanted the paint done as I make progress, and I have a logos folder. And I also have the paints themselves saved at different points so that I can go back and start over at a certain point if I need to. So the first thing we're going to do is create a folder real quick. You right click anywhere on your desktop, go to new folder, and we're going to call this Gen 6 SS Gimp. We'll just do a real basic Gimp scheme. And inside of that folder, we're going to create right click, new folder, logos. And this is for any logos that you download that you may or may not use, and it's just an easy point to find them later when you're doing that. Now, I'm assuming you've already downloaded the Gimp. I'm not going to go through that process. So we're going to close that out, and we're going to move this folder over here out of the way. And now what we need to do is download the templates. So you go over to your iRacing forums. You can do this in a couple places. This is probably the best place to go to get all the templates. You go to General Painting Discussion, Painting Basics, which is sticky at the top. You go to the second post here, and here's the templates. Now, when you click on that, it's going to ask you whether you want to download it. I've already created a separate folder on my desktop for iRacing templates just for this demonstration. I actually have it somewhere else for when I'm doing my normal paints. And I did it the same way. You just right click on the desktop, new folder. But you can see here, I already have one created. And so I would browse to that desktop, iRacing templates, and download it here. And you can see I've already done that. So we'll cancel out of this. And we'll close out of that. We'll minimize this. Now, once you have the templates downloaded, it's in a zip file, which is just a compressed file. If you right click on that compressed file, and there's free programs that allows you to, whether it's WinRAR, R-A-R, or WinZip, there's programs that allow you to extract these for free on a trial basis, but the trial really never ends. So you can go extract here and extract them all. If you double click on it, what you'll get is a little deal to purchase it, but you can just close that, and you can see the individual templates here. You can actually drag these out over here separately if you want. And I have a separate 3 screens, so you'll see me dragging stuff in and out, and I'm sorry for that. But we'll close that out. What we're going to do is we're going to right-click, and we're going to extract here, and we're going to let it extract all the templates so that we have them in one place, and whenever we want to get to a new template, we can get to them. And once we're done with that, we're going to open up the Gen 6 SS, and we're going to start painting with Gimp. I already have the Gimp software open. I just have it minimized down here to save time. And we're going to shrink that back down. We'll move this out of the way down here somewhere. Oops. Yeah, it's not going to let me. So we want to open up the Chevy SS. Now, if you haven't used Gimp before, another paint program, or you have, what you want to do is right click and then open with. Now, if you don't have your program here that you want to use, click choose default program. It may be up here. If not, you can click your down arrow, search for it here, or you can also browse to it by clicking on your browse button. There's also a little button down here that says always use the selected program to open this kind of file. So if I click and open Gimp right now with this checked, every one of those PSDs, because that's the type of file it is, whatever PSD is on my computer, if I just open it up, it's going to open it in Gimp. If I don't want to do that, just want to open that one file, just unclick that, and then double click on Gimp and open it with Gimp. And now it's open. And here is your template for from iRacing for the Gen 6 SS. To open up these windows, if they're not already open, your Layers tab in your toolbox, just go to Windows and then Dockable Dialogues, and that's where you open them up or close them down. So if you close it on accident, like that, you can also go to Windows, Recently Closed Documents, or you can go here and just click on Layers, and there it is again. And then you can stretch it or whatever. You can also dock these to your main deal. I like keeping them separate. The first thing I always do with a new template is I set it up so it's easier for me to use. With Gimp, you're not going to get separate folders in here except for these two. With Photoshop, you'll get a bunch of different folders where they belong and whatnot. But we're going to create a separate folder by going down here and clicking on Create New Layer Group, a new group, folder group, and we're going to move this to the top for now. And then we're going to create another one. We want 2 of these. I want 2 of these. And there's a reason for this. So double click it to name it. We'll name this one Graphics. We'll name this one Logos. We're going to want to now move these below paintable area. And the logos you're going to want above your Graphics tab, if that's how you're going to do it. Because you're going to want your logos above whatever graphics you build, whether it be a tribal design or something like that. You always want your logos on top. So having these folders in the right order are going to help. Now this paintable area's got some things you want to move to your graphics. Your patterns, which I don't ever use, but just to get them out of the way or you can delete it. And your base, and leave that over the top. Logos we'll use later, and this turn off before exporting. Some templates, if you leave these contingencies on, then it'll double them up and they'll be off to the side a little bit. It's not always the case. And we'll talk a little bit about the different types of files that you can, how you save the TGA. You can actually save it so you don't show those contingencies at all if that's what you choose to do. The first thing we're going to do real quick is we're going to change the base color. Let's just change it to white. We got white selected. We click our bucket fill tool. And it'll fill everything that's selected. And if there's nothing selected, it'll fill that whole selection, that whole layer. we want to fill whole selection. It starts with fill similar colors. Now, if you have that clicked and you just bucket fill something that's selected that's a different color, it'll only fill that separate color. I always use fill whole selection. So click fill whole selection, make sure our base layer is selected, and now we have a white template. The other thing I do is I turn my wire on usually, and I change the color of my wireframe. The best way to do this, if you click on your wireframe, your layer, you go to colorize, or colors, sorry, colorize, and now because the wireframe's black, you're not going to see any color difference until you lighten it up to about 50%. Now you're starting to see some color in there. Let's change the saturation up. And I always go to, like a bright green, a color that I don't normally use. That way it doesn't interfere or I can't see it because of a color I use. Hit OK. Now when you use colorize like that, all you're going to do is change the color of whatever isn't empty space or alpha or blank. If I would use a bucket fill, it would fill this whole layer in. You can also right-click alpha to selection, and it will select just whatever isn't alpha or blank, and you can bucket fill that way, but it's much more difficult and it causes some lag. And learn your shortcuts. Control-Shift-A will deselect stuff. It's the same thing as going to select and hitting none. We're also going to lower our transparency, our opaquency a little bit down so that it's not so bright and gets in our way as much. Now let's go back to the base. Now what we want to do is just create a real basic design. And for that, what I use, probably 90% of my paints, is this pass tool. This pass tool allows you to click different points and then change how it designs. So we'll click on pass tool. We're going to zoom in by holding control down and using our mouse wheel up. And that'll zoom in a little bit. Now, we're going to put a point here, a point here, maybe a point here, and then we'll just finish this off down here somewhere. Now, what we can do is change these lines. If you just mouse over any part of this, you can see what I'm doing here. Just drag and hold. Hit Control Z when you're done if you want to back out. The closer you are to the dot, the more it affects that spot. So we're just going to do something pretty simple like this. Then we're going to come over here and drag this one up a little bit so it comes up and does something, I don't know, just something different. We'll do the same thing back here. Let's click on this dot and move it back a little bit. We'll just move this back in like that. Now we'll hit Enter, which will make that a selection. We'll swap our colors to black. We'll do a bucket fill and make that a black fill. Now let's put a hood logo on. So Control-Shift-A, again, to deselect. Let's go to our Logos folder over here on the right. Click on Logos. Now we need to find the logo that we want to put on the hood, and we're calling this a Gimp car. So let's minimize this. Let's open up our browser. And I like Google for images, so we'll click Google, go to the top here where it says images, and let's type in Gimp logo. And really you want to find the biggest, cleanest logo you can. And if you can find it in a PNG, that's even better. Some of these aren't bad. That one's not bad. Let's click on this one for now. Let's go to View Original Image. Right click, Save Image As. And now we're going to save it to that logos folder we created for this car. So we go to Desktop to browse to our car folder. Open our car folder, open up logos, and this is where we're going to save it. You can also right click and copy image. And that'll copy it to what's called a clipboard, which is just basically your clipboard is where you save anything that you copy to an invisible space on the back behind your computer, essentially. So next time I paste something, it'll paste whatever I saved by clicking copy. So we're done with this. Let's minimize this. Let's open up our paint folder for that car. We'll go to logos and we want to open this up. Now, I'm going to right click again and go to open with, and we're going to open up with Gimp. Because, again, I've used Adobe a little bit, and I'm not sure what my default program is. We can click choose default. We'll unclick this for now, and we'll just open it with Gimp. Now we have our folder here. Our new layer. And this was a PNG, which is great, which means it's got an alpha, it's invisible on the back, it's not something we have to remove later. And if it was white, it wouldn't matter much for where we're putting it anyway. So we're going to open up our car paint. We're going to move this back over here. We're going to move this down a little bit, and I'll show you why in a minute. We click on logos, so that way whatever we drag over here is going to drag into the logos folder. And you can move these layers later if you put it in the wrong place, just like so. We're going to click on that new image. We're going to go over here, hold Control, and then click and drag that layer from the bar over here right on top of your paint. So now we have it as part of our template. By the way, before you get into some of this stuff, once you create your folders and you change the color of your wire, it's a good idea to save this, and you save it as, name it something like Gen 6 SS Clean or My Template. That way you don't have to redo that stuff every time. You just open up that version and you have your setup to begin with. So Control, mouse wheel back to zoom out a little bit. We want to put this in the logos folder because we want it to be above our graphics. And it will be if it's above that layer, but the separate folders make it easier. I always right click here, duplicate layer. That way if I screw it up, I have my original still here. And we just hit this little eyeball and then I'll make it invisible. Now we have our hood logo that we're going to use. The first thing we want to do is counterclockwise rotate that. So you go, it doesn't matter what tool you have. If you go to Layer, Transform, and we want to counterclockwise 90 degrees. You can also click on this rotation tool and move it this way too. And what you don't see right now because it's on my monitor is this here, which is your rotation. Just like that. But we know we wanted it right at 90, so we're fine with that. Now we want to resize that layer. And then we want to move it down to the hood. So we go to our scale tool. We click on this. And what normally you'll get is you'll get a bunch of lines on here. Something like that. When you first start Gimp, go to No Guides. That's what I choose to do. It's easier to see what you're doing. And you want to keep the aspect ratio, so make sure that's clicked. Now, even with that clicked, you can adjust your aspect ratio, okay? But with that being clicked, when you move this corner, it'll keep that aspect no matter what you do as long as you're on the corner when you move it. If it's not clicked and you grab this corner, you see how you can adjust, which isn't really what you want most of the time. So make sure keep aspect is clicked, and we're going to move this down, and in the middle of scaling we're going to grab the center to move this a little bit. We'll get it somewhere close to where we want it. Control, mouse wheel up to zoom in. And we just want it somewhere here in the middle, and always scale down. Don't scale up after, you know, while I'm in the middle of scaling, I can do this all day long, and it's not going to affect the clarity or, you know, how good the picture looks. But once I hit OK to accept the change, hit scale, I'm not going to want to scale back up, because if I do, it's going to make it look blurry. See the outside's how it's blurry. Control Z is how you back out of a step you did. Now, if I wanted to scale down more, I can do that without hurting the image. So now we have this, you know, for the most part where we want it. We're going to back out a little bit. And now we're going to go take a look at what this looks like in Sim. Actually, before we do that, let us save this. So that way, if we do some changes later and we don't like it, we can get back to this exact point. So I go to File, save as, and it's automatically going to save it as an XCF file, which is Gimp's version of PSD for Photoshop. It's Gimp's file. It's Gimp's layer file, XCF. We just want to rename it to Gen. You can name it to whatever you want. I name it to Gen 6 SS Gimp. And we're going to save it in that folder we created before. Make sure it says .xcf. That's the file type. You can also get to it down here. But when you're saving a file, this is all the options you get for saving. Export, something different. Oops. So file, save as, Gen 6 SS Gimp, and we want to browse to our desktop and our Gimp folder that we saved. And you can have a separate folder in here if you want, but I don't. I just save it right into this folder and save. So now we have this paint saved, and we can open it up with these layers anytime we want. So if we close it, we'll minimize this one. We'll open here and open up our Gimp paint, and there it is. And sometimes you gotta minimize it, make it go back up to get your windows here back. And you just drag this to wherever you want. Now, if you lose your dockable windows here, and if I've said this already, I'm sorry. You just go to recently closed windows or dockable dialogs, and you can open up these bars that have the tools and the layers. These are the two that I use always. So hold Control, zoom in. There's our paint. Now, to get this in iRacing, you have to export it to the correct paint folder. So we go to File for Gimp, File, Export. And by the way, you're only going to have to do it this way one time. Every change you make after this, it's just a matter of hitting a button and you're good to go. And I'll explain that later. You go to Documents, iRacing, Paint. The old you may not see any cars in here. If you haven't been on the track since they made the change, you won't see any folders here for separate cars. The old car folders are in this cars folder. The new one, which this still works, what iRacing does is it reads the new folders first. If there's nothing there, it goes to the old folders. The new ones are outside of that cars folder. They're just under paint. If you don't have the car folder there for the car that you're painting, then you just have to get into a test session, a practice session with that car, and that folder will be created. Now we're going to go to Stock Cars Chevy SS because that's the Gen 6. And you can see I already have a car there. And you see the name. The name in the new folders has to be car, underscore, and your number. If there's any zeros in your number, you leave the zeros off if they're up front. But there's none in mine, so it's car, underscore, number.tga. When you save it like this, what'll happen is it'll save it with these contingency stickers and everything that iRacing stamps off. Now, if you save it, say you didn't want the contingency stickers to show. You unclick the contingency stickers, and there's a few other things on different cars that allows you to do this. Now, if we were to go File, Export, and we're in the same paint folder, if we were to name it car, underscore, decal, underscore, and our name, it's going to save it without those contingency stickers, and they won't be stamped on there. However, Trading Paints currently doesn't recognize that format, and I don't like to use it myself. But some people, if you have a design that runs through those contingencies, it's important to maybe move some of those contingencies to make your design pop. Some people like to do that. Personally, until Trading Paints supports it, I'm not even going to mess with it. If they're supporting it now, I apologize for the misinformation, but I don't think right now they are. So we're going to cancel that. So car, decal, number, if you want some things not to show up, or say your number in a test session as well. But car, number, just like this, and the contingency stickers will be stamped on for you. So now it's in the iRacing paint folder. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look. Now, I always create replay. So I'll go in with the Gen 6 car, I'll do a test session, I'll cut out a piece of it, save it as a replay, and so every time I go in, to see a car or paint a car, you just go to the event, you go to events, replays, and I have replays saved for the different cars that I painted. The reason I do this is because I don't want to have to go into a test session and save a new replay every time. Plus, it helps with consistency on my website. I always get the same image for being so everything, it looks the same. So I have a test session saved under Impala COT Bristol Knight Gen 5. The other thing this prevents you from doing, though, is you'll always, whatever font, number, and color you set up in iRacing, once you save that replay, you can't change that font number for that replay. You can go into a different test session and have it changed, but that replay is always going to have the same font number and the settings that you had for it, which is one disadvantage to doing it this way, but it certainly saves time. So, I opened up the wrong replay. I'm sorry about that. Let's close that out. What we want is, I can't believe I did that, Gen 6 Bristol Knight. This one right here is the one we want. We'll let that load up. One other thing we can talk about really quick is iRacing now allows you to do these paints at 2048 by 2048. Now, it won't show up at that resolution, but eventually it will. So what you can do is you can do them in 2048 by 2048, and iRacing will automatically downsize it to 1024 for you. And the advantage of that is eventually when iRacing allows 2048, if you're doing them all 2048 now, then you won't have to redo those paints later. So do them by 2048 if you want. iRacing will downsize it. If I was to export this and it was 2048, it's going to look just like it's going to look here in a minute by exporting it at 1024. And there's no difference between iRacing doing it or you doing it and resizing it before you pop it in. I couldn't see a difference when I tested it. So, excuse me. Alright, so let's go look at our replay. Now, here is the car that we've, basically did. If you hit Control 12, it'll give you some camera options. I use my WDS keys and stuff like that. There's some other options up here. Let's go to Add Car. And you can see the changes that we made, and there they're on the car. And it's really that simple. Now let's make another change, and I'll show you how to quickly do that. So we're in windowed mode, so we're just going to minimize this. We'll get rid of this. We'll open up, or get back in here. Now let's, we can do anything. Let's take this paint. We'll duplicate the hood logo. And then what we're going to do is we're going to rotate it around a little bit. Like that. We'll hit rotate. And we'll move it. And by the way, if you want to move a layer, make sure you have that layer clicked. And if there's a layer above it, like a metallic layer or something, you're not going to be able to grab it. You can use your arrow keys. Oops. Once you click here, you can use your arrow keys and move it. But if you're having trouble grabbing it, there's a layer above it preventing you from doing it. So we're just going to move this over here. Say maybe right there. We'll lower the opaquency down a little bit. And then what we're going to do, because we've already exported it once, if I wanted to export it somewhere else, I would have to go to File, Export, and then browse where I want it to. But if I want to export it to the same place I just exported it to, which is the proper folder, all I have to do is hold Control and hit E. You'll see down here it exported. It exported that folder that we had for iRacing. So we open this, hold Control, hit R, let it work, and there you go. There's the changes that we just made. So every time you make a change, so let's duplicate that again. Right click, duplicate, and we'll move it over here. Grab our window, hit Control, hold Control, hit E to re-export it to the last place. Open up a window, hold Control, hit R, and there's the change. You can see the change that I just made. Once you're done, and you're done with your paint, and you want to get the paint onto Trading Paints, you'll have to go to File, Export, and then export it somewhere that you'll be able to browse to when you're uploading it to Trading Paints. So your desktop, for example. So let's just change the name. And it could be anything when you upload it to Trading Paints. It doesn't have to be your number. Trading Paints will automatically assign it to your number because you're logged in with your account. So we'll just call this Gen 6 SS Gimp. And I've browsed to my desktop. I'm going to export it to there. RLE compression, bottom left, hit export. I'm going to minimize this, and there it is. So now when we upload the Trading Paints, we just browse to that, and there you have it. And that is a pretty rough example. I use the pen tool and this colorize option for almost everything. And you know, your bucket fill, but this is just a real simple tutorial on how to get your paints into iRacing as you progress and want to see the changes that you make. Once you're done, make sure you change. Now, if I hit Control R again, all it's going to do is going to export that to the last place, or Control E rather. It's going to export it to the last place I did it, so it's going to put it on the desktop. It's not going to put it back in that folder. So what I have to do is go to File, Export if I've made a change. You can go to Recently Used Documents, which makes it a little bit easier to go down here and find them. Make sure you're in the right path. That's the right one. Double click here, Replace, Export, and now every time I hit Control E, it's going to export it back to where that is, which is the iRacing Paint folder. So if we want to, let's just shrink that down and take a look one more time. Hit Control E. We'll go back to our paint folder, or our sim, and you see the program there. See that, or sorry, rather the icon, or the logo, and we change that. So we're going to hold Control, hit R, and it should be gone. And now it's gone. Okay? I use, like I said, my W, S, and D after you hit Control R. If you hold Control and hit Z, you can also move your camera around like this. Control Z again to get rid of that, and you want to make sure it's at car or at group when you do that, or it's going to make it goofy like that. You could also go back to static and then hit Control Z, move around, use your mouse wheel or your mouse buttons to zoom in, zoom out. And this is probably going to look real laggy. It's not laggy when you do it in game, but Fraps records laggy on iRacing. So there you have it. I might do more tutorials later for maybe some more advanced tips and stuff like that. But this really should get you started. If you have any questions, please just shoot me a PM in iRacing, and I'll do what I can to help you. Again, I apologize if you had trouble understanding me. That is nothing I can do about that, but I hope that, you know, some of this helps. So thank you all very much for your time, and happy painting.